Deborah, thank you very much for joining us. And
It's great to be here.
And I guess you live in
Great to hear the
Boston,
quartet,
so-
yeah. Yeah, I'm a New Yorker, but you won't hear any accent, of course. But my mom divorced and remarried a guy from Boston, and we moved up when I was 12, and I grew up in Newton and played in the Greater Boston Youth Symphony. So
I did not know that.
so-
Okay.
so that's when I first started to go wrong.
And you are in Boston now until the end of the until December.
Until
so,
December, when the weather gets really bad, and then I'm going to head back to
You're-
California.
You're a smart woman. So yeah, I'd love to just hear a bit about your background. You said you grew up in Boston, and I know you have a music background, but I'd love to hear a bit about how you got into music. What were your early influences as a child? What prompted you to want to pursue a career in music to begin with?
Well, I bet we all share very individual stories of how we were drawn to music and different aspects of it. For me, I remember the first minute that I was conscious of hearing music, and I was probably about 4 years old, and I was in my family's apartment in New York, and I remember the moment very clearly. It was a very sort of sunny day with late autumn, fall sunlight coming through the window, and my mother had on a radio station, and they were playing what I later found out was classical music, and it was love at first hearing. I just loved it. And so my family didn't have a record collection of any kind, but finally they got me one of those little Victrolas, and remember the old 45s? They had these little records that were like this size, and they would play like for 3 minutes. And so they got me a recording of Eine kleine Nachmusik, and I just loved it. And that was it. I just fell in love, and I always say love at first hearing. Of course, you can't see music. And when I was 7, we actually, in those days, they actually had music programs in the school, so we lined up and we could choose our instrument, and I knew exactly what I wanted to play. I wanted to play the flute, because it seemed like a nice girl instrument or something. And it was also little. I didn't want to carry anything too big around, because I was lazy even then. But at any rate, by the time I got up there, I had a choice of a French horn or a violin. And I thought, well, the violin's, that's smaller, I'll take that one. So I started the violin, and I was not very serious. I didn't practice hard. I liked it. I had a good time in orchestra, but I really liked music. But when I was about 11 or 12, suddenly I got serious about it, and my family moved here, and I started practicing and joined the Greater Boston Youth Symphony. And then the interesting thing is, from that point on, and many of you may have had the same experience, my circle of friendships and what really motivated me was the people who I made music with. So that was my social group, not the group that I might normally interact with back in high school, but it was more that group of like-minded people. And so then, I'm giving my life story, I guess. Here's the Reader's Digest version. So I studied with the principal viola in the Boston Symphony. I switched to viola at a certain point. I played both, but so I applied to the New England Conservatory. I wanted to go there because my teacher was there. And I got in. I was actually the associate principal viola of the orchestra. I was doing very well. And about 2 or 3 months into being there, I just thought, my God, Deborah, you have made an enormous mistake. This is like going to dental school. It's like being in a trade school in a way that just wasn't right for me. I was not happy. So I applied to a number of liberal arts colleges, and I was lucky enough to be accepted by one. It's a small college up in Vermont called Bennington, and I went there. I ended up majoring in music. I ended up going to graduate school and again dropping out because I went to the Royal College of Music in London. I didn't learn from one mistake, right? I wasn't happy at New England Conservatory. Great, I go to a liberal arts college. I go to graduate school. What do? I go back to another conservatory. But maybe the second time I sort of learned my lesson.
What was the difference? I'm actually curious, sort of studying music within a conservatory or a music college like New England Conservatory, or studying music within an environment of liberal arts education, and how did that influence your future career trajectory?
Well, there are 2 real differences. I mean, I'll come back to the musical part, because I think the more profound part was actually, for me, being able to be exposed to, a greater reading list of life, taking courses on Zen Buddhism, poetry, ecology, different kinds of things. So I think, the reason, it's derived from a Greek word, actually, for liberal arts, but liberal means not enslaved. That was the original thought of it. And so for me, it was just a mind-freeing experience. And one that later in life I came, I'm always sort of seeking that larger picture. And so it did that for me. In terms of the music study, instead of being locked in a practice room, working away to perfect, thirds and all the different things we do in orchestral excerpts and very abstract analysis, we composed, we conducted the string quartet. It was fun to hear the string quartet here. We put our own string quartets together. We did the sort of business of how we would book them on winter tours and things of that nature. So again, it was sort of a liberal arts approach to music.
Looking back, and we were talking about this at lunch, that you have a BA, not an MBA.
Right.
How influential were your studies in terms of framing both what you ended up doing as a career, but also the way that you have developed your own leadership style, or the way that you've gone in terms of pursuing your career ambitions?
Yeah. Well, I have no formal training in what I do. I just went and did it, and we can talk about that later on. But I think what prepared me for anything was actually what I complained about. This is going to be typical, what I complained about before, which is about the study of music. I think there were two aspects of it that I look back at, and I see that are introduced in my daily practice. And I mean practice of being a human being, practice of running a company, not that kind of practice. But one is derived from that kind of practice, because when I'm looking at a really thorny problem, I approach that just the way I approached learning a really difficult piece. And so I remember once I was trying to learn a Hindemith unaccompanied sonata, and I just literally, I couldn't play a note of it, and I was with my teacher, and I said, I just can't play this at all. So he finally said, can you play one note? And so I picked like a C. Okay, I can play this note. And he said, okay, play that note. And he said, okay, now can you play the note next to it? So actually I could do that. And eventually I was able to construct how to play the piece and learn through that discipline. And I think that when I have to solve a problem today, I think I still approach it very much in that way. I'll talk a little bit later about how I tried to broaden that out and through study, because it wasn't official study, but I absolutely did study and educate myself. But the other practice that I learned through music was the practice of listening and playing in a group and really being able to work in a collaborative, iterative process. Not so much when you play an orchestra where you're told what to do. The conductor gets up there and says, you do this, you do that, faster, slower, and you follow, and that's fine. But in chamber music and in smaller ensembles, you learn a lot, I think, from that kind of work.
Yeah, one of the things that we talk a lot to the students, that our methodology with the Institute is taking a lot of the skills and instincts that you develop as a musician and sort of looking at them as a broader, more applicable to everyday life. So whether it's, as you said, the concept of how do you listen or observe the environment around you, or we talked a lot about discipline, and that's something that rigor that you apply as a musician applied onto a career that can produce amazing results. I want to talk a bit about the bridge between your college age self and then developing that career. So kind of what were the first steps out of college? And by the way, when you were in college, did you ever aspire to go into the executive arm of running music organizations?
Never thought I would do that. After I came back from the Royal College of Music in London, I worked in New York. I was a jobber. I did a variety of different jobs. Sometimes you play in the New Jersey Symphony. Sometimes you play at a ballet company. You had I had a quartet I put together. So I was just doing a variety of things. And I had a fellowship at Tanglewood one summer, a couple of years later. And one of my favorite things at Tanglewood was going and watching the great conductors rehearse the Boston Symphony. It was the time when Lenny Bernstein was there and many other and it was just, I felt that was my greatest learning experience at that time, was watching them work. And I just found it very inspirational. And I had friends in the Boston Symphony. And so I would go and hang out backstage. And I noticed there were all these men who walked around who were dressed differently from everybody else, and they wore suits. And they looked really important. And they seemed to sort of control things. And so I asked, I said, well, who are these guys? And I remember being told, and it's one word, the management. That's the management. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because I was the person in my quartet making the deals, negotiating the contracts, bringing the music stands, making sure there were lights. So I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. And it really just sort of stuck with me. And the more I thought about it, I thought, I would really like to try that. So I saw an advertisement. I don't know if you remember, it's still going. Pablo Casals founded something called the Marlboro Music Festival in Vermont. It was taken over by Rudolf Serkin. So I saw an advertisement that they needed an assistant scheduling director. It had the word director, so it sounded important. It was a secretary, just basically. But I thought, well, that could be cool. I could try that, and I'll, be around people that I like. So I applied, and I got the job, and that was it. I knew that, in a way, it was everything, all of my music study, all of the other things I'd thought about. And as passionate as I felt about music, I felt a real passion for enabling musicians and music to really live.
Did you have any sort of angst or reservations about making the leap from being a performing musician to somebody who works in music but on music organizations?
Terrible angst. And for the first, and actually a very bad decision, which I now regret, working, from not understanding or not coming to terms with that angst. If I would go to concerts, I would literally find myself crying. And the reason I was crying was because I knew what I was giving up. So about 6 months into it, or maybe a year, closer to a year, I just stopped practicing. I stopped playing altogether. And as I became more successful, I really isolated myself from the instrument. And so I didn't feel isolated from music, because I had some wonderful jobs, and I was making really very important musical decisions. I can read scores, I evaluate artists, but I didn't do it myself. And I feel really sad about that today. And I mean, I guess I could start again. I tried, and I was shocked at how difficult it was, and how much, because I would work 3 or 4 hours every day just practicing, and then, do other things. And I was amazed that, 20 years later, it was gone, basically. I mean, or it was gone at a level that I could even get any enjoyment out of it. And that's one of it's a real sadness of my life. And if there's one thing it's probably a lot of things I would go back and do differently, but that would be a profound difference that I would not stop playing.
So you don't play anymore?
No, but maybe someday.
That's interesting, because I've had a similar story. I mean, sadly I stopped playing guitar about 20 years ago, and my wife's like, "Why don't you play some for our kids?" And I'm like, I forgot most of it. My brain still thinks and acts like a musician, but the skills of playing are sadly gone. So I have a similar regret.
Of course, I can read music. I could, I have to make judgments, about artists all the time. Not in the orchestra, but our soloists and conductors. But it is amazing that physicality of, can you do a spiccato? Can you vibrate? It went.
Do you find that even though you're not a practicing or performing musician, that you still think and act like a musician?
Well, I would always tell people I'm a musician. That's what I think of myself as. Although certainly not a performing one, at least an enjoying one. It's been so funny being here in Boston, because I've, when back in Los Angeles, I will go to 5 or 6 concerts a week, and I was saying to Panos before, I have to do a lot of fundraising, so there'll often be a fundraising dinner before the concert, and then I take the artists out afterwards, and so it's not that it's stressful, but it's a lot of work. And here, I have just been going to concerts, and I just go to the concert, and I don't go backstage, and I go out to dinner with my friends before or after if I want to, and I have just been loving going to concerts so much, and just loving, that whole experience. And that's been sort of interesting for me to to experience.
So after that, you've had obviously a lot of high-profile positions, and you've worked on many different orchestras. The one before LA obviously was the New York Philharmonic, but you've been at the Detroit Symphony, you've been at the San Francisco Symphony, I think St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. Just sort of walk us through that part of your career, and how did one thing lead to another? And I'd also love to hear sort of how you approached, change is a constant to use an often repeated phrase, but how did you approach every situation, and were there any skills that you felt helped you in particularly adapting every single time to all these different environments and different cities, different cultures, if you will?
Well, I was lucky because after the Marlboro job, I got a job managing a very small music group, which is still here in Boston today. Remarkably enough, it's called Boston Musica Viva, and I think they're in their 47th season, and they do just contemporary music. Very small, really terrific place, and I worked there for just 2 seasons, and then got another job almost immediately because I was good at what I did, I guess, at the Handel and Haydn Society, and was there running that for about 2 years when I got a call from the San Francisco Symphony to come out and interview for a job for what was in those days, and I think it's still called that, artistic administrator, which is the person who plans the programs with the conductor, negotiates the fees for the artists, basically helps to assemble the season.
How did they find out about you?
Well, I don't know.
You just don't just get a call every day from the San Francisco Symphony.
Well, actually, that's how things happen in the executive world. It's a headhunter called me. They had headhunters, not a horrible word. A search firm called me. So I went out and I talked to them, and amazingly enough, because I didn't know what I was doing really at that level, I got the job, and it was sort of a race against time. Would they figure out that I didn't know how to do the job before I would learn how to do the job? And eventually I got by. It was a close call a couple of times. But something very important happened then, which was that the person who was the CEO of the organization took an interest in what I could do. And he was his name was Peter Pastreich. He ran the San Francisco Symphony for many years. And he became my mentor. And I was there 8 years working in all different aspects because I started as artistic administrator, and eventually I was promoted to be what would be the chief operating officer today. They called it general manager then. And his working with him in his guidance was really critical in terms of my learning the broader spectrum of management and all the different aspects, marketing, finance, fundraising, because a CEO of an orchestra is in some ways, they've got to know about the core of it, the importance of the central product of the music, but they have to be a jack of all trades at supervising many other areas, especially in these big organizations now, because they'll have literally 100 administrative employees or more. So that was for me a critical moment. In terms of thinking, though, about, did I have to, yes, every culture is different, but there's a basic set of skills about how you put a budget together, strategic planning, governance, how you help people to form a vision, labor negotiations. These kinds of things carry through any place you go.
We talked over lunch about mentors. I'm just curious to hear from you, sort of, did you seek these people out, and you said, I'm going to find a mentor, or did it just happen? Yeah. Because it's a question I get from students all the time, how do I connect with a mentor? And I'm just curious about your answer and experience.
It was natural. It was just working together and his giving me advice, sometimes my going to him for advice. But I think, people have come to me and said, will you mentor me? And I think since it's a real relationship, it actually has to evolve in the way a relationship evolves. You can't just say, okay, I will mentor that person. There has to be a connection. There has to be a kind of emotional and intellectual connection, and that's when you have really significant mentorship, where it's somebody that, you as the mentor feel there's a click for you and the mentee, if we call them that. It sounds sort of like a patient from a mental hospital. The mentee also feels that click. So I know they set up at the League of American Orchestras, they send up all these mentorship programs, and I believe in it, and I think it's great. But I think how you make that connection, because it's a sort of a chemical combustion when it works.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I found that sometimes the people who have been my mentors wouldn't even know it.
Yeah.
We never had an official, oh, you're my mentor. We have some ceremony. It just happened. Looking back, sometimes I said, oh yeah, that person was really influential in the way that I think.
Peter, I never said, will you be my mentor? And he never said, I'm your mentor. No, it was just that relationship developed. And it made an interesting kind of transition for me, because we've been very close over the years. And I remember, because I think I was 37 or 38 when I went to run the New York Philharmonic, and it was pretty daunting. And this will sound really wimpy, but I would call him literally almost every day to talk to him.
Wow.
And what was so great, and this is why he was such a great mentor, I would call with the burning question du jour, and he would never give me the answer, and by the end of the conversation, I figured it out as best I could. And the beautiful thing about this relationship is, I guess I would still call him my mentor, but he's also one of my best friends. So it evolved into a friendship later on.
And it's interesting, Deborah, because I hear this among many, many successful people, sort of the not being reluctant to reach out for advice. I think that often we misunderstand leadership as sort of the person, again, we talked a bit about over lunch,
Yeah.
sort of you have to have all the answers. And I know in my life when I was running my company, I was very conflicted sometimes, and I felt, well, everybody's coming to me for answers, I should have them. And it wasn't until I became a lot more mature that I came to terms with the fact that, no, actually you're a good leader if you reach out to people for advice. But I'd like to just get your perspective.
We talked about this at lunch about 5 or 6 years ago. I had a small crisis for myself in terms of my management ability. Now, to the outside world, everything was completely successful. We had Gustavo Dudamel, the orchestra had a balanced budget since 2003. We reimagined what the institution could be. But I came to a point where I simply felt, I think I have to leave and find something else to do, because I'm just not very good at my job. So I started thinking about it, because I loved my job, but it was making this feeling of I'm not doing as well as I could do, made me not be happy. I mean, I felt unhappiness. And so I started thinking about it and analyzing it and actually doing a lot of study. Because one of the things, I've never gotten an MBA, as you say, or any kind of graduate degree, but I'm a student at all times. So I'm always reading, not just things that will, enlarge who I am as a human being, but also, a lot of books about management and strategic planning. And so I read a book that was actually by a famous professor at MIT named Edward Schein. He's recently retired. And it was a whole series of books, actually. His most recent one is called The Humble Inquiry, which is about how we need to listen and ask questions. And in studying this, what I came to realize was that through my mentor, who I absolutely tried to be like, that he had run organizations in a very different time. And that what he espoused, or what he lived, and very successfully, was what I would call a model of old-fashioned heroic leadership. And by that, what I mean is that one always had the answers. One would be in front of the line and take the bullet if that had to happen. And I remember when we would have our senior staff meetings, we would lay out a problem. We had been taught how to lay it out, and then he would give the answer, and it would be a great answer. But I think as the world has become more complex, and especially the area that I work in, much more static, the symphony orchestra world, I came to see that, in fact, that was not what I thought could be the most successful process. And what would be could be a more successful process was actually a more iterative process where, you had a great team around you. You gave them responsibility and authority. And instead of giving an answer, you ask the right questions and you let the answer develop. Now, sometimes as a leader, you have to say, okay, we will do this or that. But that was such a profound way of thinking for me that it really changed how our team worked together. And our team had been together, for a long time, the core team. But it also changed my own, our success at many things. But it also changed my own enjoyment of what I did.
That's interesting. I mean, as I've gotten older, I've one of the things I'm trying to get better at is learning how to ask better questions. And it's profoundly hard, actually, to know what questions to ask.
Oh, it's not that it's easier than giving the answer, but you'll get to a better place. And I think increasingly, in 2015, as you look at successful management teams, there has to be a leader on some level, but they are teams, and they are teams that are interdependent and that really inspire each other and challenge each other. Because I think that sense of challenge, if you lose it, that takes away your ability to keep learning if we don't always challenge ourselves.
We talked a bit about the jazz orchestra as a metaphor for effective organizational leadership. But I'd like you to talk a bit about that.
About
sort of like at lunch you said, gee, I see sort of a jazz orchestra as a bit of an interesting metaphor for leadership.
Not a jazz orchestra, really. I'm not sure I said that. I mean, I think what is actually not necessarily a good model for leadership, honestly, is a symphony orchestra.
Actually, tell me a bit about it, because a lot of people will say, oh, well, leadership is all about, it's just like being a conductor.
People, they give courses where they teach executives how to be great executives using the epitome, using the maestro, the music director. And it's not bad. I mean, we need great music directors and great conductors. But to me, it's getting to be a sort of old-fashioned model. I mean, first of all, one thing, thank goodness, that's changing is, when you thought of, a conductor, I remember the first concert I saw as a kid was Leonard Bernstein conducting the New York Philharmonic in a children's concert. But, for years, the only people who conducted were men, and European men, if we could have them. That would be old European men. That would be good. I guess they couldn't be dead, but aside from that, okay.
Debatable sometimes.
Yeah, and they were great. But I mean, to me, that we are moving into a different place. And I think that if you look at how the people who are music directors and conductors work today with orchestras, they work in a very different model from how Toscanini worked or Bernstein worked or Reiner, and it's much more collaborative. If you watch Gustavo Dudamel rehearse with the orchestra, first of all, whether he's rehearsing with a group of 100 10-year-olds or 20-year-olds or the Los Angeles Philharmonic, he extends the same humanity and courtesy and partnership and the same way of teaching, because he's a teacher. And I think that this is evolving. I mean, the other thing that's sort of fascinating to me is that, for years it was, there have been many glass ceilings, but I think one of the harshest glass ceilings has been for female conductors. And I think it's because the epitome has been seen as, it's a prototypic male undertaking where a guy is in charge and he has the specific body language of a man, and that was all people could aspire to. And it's so, one of the things we've done at the Los Angeles Philharmonic, we're going off on a little bit of a tangent now, but that's okay, I guess, is that we almost always, we have a staff of conductors that we keep, an associate conductor, or an assistant conductor, and then people who are called the Dudamel Fellows, who are 4 people who come to us during the year and study with us. But we always have at least 2 women, either within an assistant or an associate, or one or two of the Dudamel Fellows, so that when we have our youth concerts, I'm very, very careful that as much as possible, the women, and I'm just going to have to use this word, the women conductors, the female conductors, conduct those concerts so that when kids come to their first concert, the first person they see leading an orchestra is a woman. I cannot tell you how that has broken things down. You can just hear people talk about it differently within our audience. And I'm finally now seeing also women who are able to break through the stereotype of whatever it was and be in their own bodies and in their own selves as musicians. And it's so inspirational to finally see that, because it's been such a long battle.
You know, you brought up something I haven't thought enough about, but clearly in corporate America, the way that you manage in 2015 is very, very different, especially the way that you manage this generation, the millennials, if you will, is extremely different than the way that people managed in the 50s and the 60s. At least from the outside world, orchestras have been pretty sort of monolithic to some degree. They've been, you always envision the conductor as the ultimate command and control kind of figure. But I haven't thought about how the social changes that have happened over the last 30 years, the changing relationship with authority that people have had over the last 30 years, how that's been translated within the orchestra world. But you just mentioned something I never thought about, but has it been evident to you, having lived in the orchestra world for quite some time, how even the relationship between conductor and orchestras have evolved? So it's not just Gustavo, but have you seen this be across the board?
Oh yeah, it's definitely across the boards. It's just a different way of doing things now that are acceptable, because we have people sitting in orchestras who were 20 and 30 and 40, and it's not going to work in that way. You're not going to get the same results. Yeah, I think that's definitely changed. I mean, but there's so much that, it's a challenge that needs to change at these big sort of symphonic institutions, which is, for example, if you look at these institutions today, they do not reflect the communities in which they play. So that if you look at, the big honkin' major orchestras, my own among them, I think we have in the 106 players, we have 5 minorities within it. And so our orchestra, and we're like the top of any other orchestra. I mean, I think, and most orchestras might have one of the major, the Big Ten orchestras might have one or none. So that I think, in terms of thinking about the long-term sustainability of these institutions within our communities and our society, and what is the values exchange, what is the social contract, that we've really got to think about that. This is a very significant problem.
I've been talking to a lot of people, even within the classical world, and it's one of the things that I admire about what you've done at the LA Philharmonic, which we'll talk about shortly. But given that music is a byproduct of the very society that sort of gives it birth, right? Mm-hmm. So when we think of, and it's almost impossible, frankly, to sometimes separate eras from the soundtrack of that era. Mm-hmm. So when I say 20s or 30s, most people associate it with a particular type of jazz music. When you say 60s and 70s, people tend to associate it with a particular soundtrack. 80s the same, 90s the same. How can music that was fundamentally created at a very different time, reflecting perhaps very different values, and whether it's classical or jazz, how can it remain relevant in when it's performed at a very different time in front of a very, very different audience with a very different social contract, if you will?
Oh, but that's the beautiful thing about music, which is you can, I'm talking about how we deliver it, but the art itself speaks for itself. It sustains itself. And that's why, we tour all over the world with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and, we can be in China or in the Philippines, or, and you can play so-called whatever we want to call our music, serious music, classical music, and people love it. I mean, it speaks to people's hearts as great jazz could, or great pop songs. So I think that's the great thing, that music is a truly universal art, and it's an abstract art form. I mean, you can't see it. You can't write, we can write it down, but most people, it's something that you have to experience pretty much in your head, even if you're at a live concert, although that communal experience is certainly exciting. I mean, I went to a performance of, it was an amateur performance the other day of the Mozart Requiem at the chapel at Harvard. And it was, amateur, the soloists were professional, but, it was a student-run organization. And it was just so moving to me. I was just sitting there listening to this piece. Now, it didn't have to be classical music, but it's just, that's what's great about music. That's why we love it. That's why you do what you do, and I do what I do.
So I'm going to go back to the beginning a bit of your association with the LA Philharmonic. So you were at New York Philharmonic for quite some time.
10 years.
10 years.
I always say when I got the job, I was like in my 30s. No woman had ever run one of the major orchestras in the United States, if you can believe it, how retro that is. But in addition to that, I was young, so I got there and I thought, now, this is going to sound negative because, of course, I'm on my sabbatical at Harvard now, but I don't mean it to sound negative. So I thought, okay, this is like becoming president of Harvard. I will do this the rest of my life. This is great. I'm on top of the world. Mm-hmm. And so I was there for 10 years, and it was a successful 10 years. But I have to say, after the first couple of years, because I had a lot of ideas about things that we could do to really shift the paradigm and make some major changes in the classical music world, and successful, things went well, but I felt I was sort of in a box that was closing in on me each year. And that in terms of my own creativity and my own drive, which was why I went into management, was to bring music to more people. I just felt it wasn't expanding me. I wasn't accomplishing what I wanted to.
How did the opportunity come about?
Well, it was crazy. Actually, it was one morning, you know how you get the New York Times on Saturday, the arts and leisure section, and New York Philharmonic plays in a terrible hall at Lincoln Center it used to be called Avery Fisher Hall. It's been reconstructed many times. When it was first built for the Philharmonic and Leonard Bernstein, they called it Philharmonic Hall. And it's, right next to the Metropolitan Opera in Lincoln Center. And it was a complete disaster. Acoustically, nobody could hear. So within 2 years, they ripped out the entire inside and they completely rebuilt it. And Avery Fisher, who was a philanthropist and who owned Fisher Stereo and Components, gave money for it, and they redid it and they called it Avery Fisher Hall.
Until recently.
But the problem with Avery Fisher Hall was it still wasn't good. And it was a real problem. And if you would go to a concert there today, what you would feel is the orchestra or the performers are in one room and you're in another. It's this great sort of abstraction and removal. So I knew we could raise the money to do it. I really thought it was very important that we fix the hall for once and for all, and that we leave the shell up, but that we totally take out the inside and make a different kind of performance space, a very different kind of performance space. And I was working at that and never got it done. So I'm sort of discouraged about that. And one morning I pick up the newspaper, this Saturday morning, and it's a picture of a new symphony hall that is going to be built. It's an artist, not just a model, but it's a sort of fake photograph of a new symphony hall that's going to be built in Los Angeles, and it's called the Walt Disney Concert Hall. And it was designed by, and I knew nothing about architecture at the time, I know a lot more now, designed by somebody named Frank Gehry. And I looked at it and I just thought, this is the single most beautiful building I have ever seen in my life. Notre Dame, any other thing you think, this is it for me. So that was my first reaction. My second was I was incredibly jealous, because we couldn't get it done and I couldn't get it done. I knew I couldn't there. And then about 2 years later, I got a call one day, and not from a search firm this time, but actually from the chairman of the board of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, saying that they really wanted me to come and take the job, and et cetera, et cetera. And I said, yeah, you want to interview me? No, we're offering you the job. We'll negotiate the contract with you right now. So I said, well, I'm going on vacation. I don't know. I'm going up to an island off the coast of Maine. They said, we'll fly there. Well, so then they had Frank Gehry call me.
Frank Gehry called
Frank
you?
Gehry called me. He said, I'm going to get on a plane and come see you. So I said, well, wow. That's you don't have to do that. And I actually, after my vacation, I did take my vacation, I would add. I went out to California, and I just, I fell in love with the design of the building. I was just completely taken by the creativity of Frank Gehry. I felt there was a very openness towards it. And
was it built at the time? Or
no, it was a hole. It was actually a hole in the ground because they had started the construction and then run out of money. So it was a big disaster. The odyssey of the building of Walt Disney Concert Hall was 17 years from when it was announced to when it was opened. 17
Oh my God,
years.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it was a mess. And he, in fact, Frank Gehry designed the Bilbao Museum, which was his most famous building at the time, which opened first. He designed that after he designed the Walt Disney Concert Hall. So at any rate, I went out and I met Frank and I met Esa-Pekka Salonen, who also became a great, great collaborator. And I just thought, you know, I'm at a point in my life where I'm young enough, I've got a lot of energy, and I thought I could actually make a difference here. I could make a difference. So I loaded up my covered wagon and moved out west.
Wow.
And I was going to go for 5 years and get things settled and get the hall open and raise a big endowment for them and then come back east. And I'm there almost 16 years later because I've just loved it.
Wow. So, you know, this is a project that you said was 17 years in the making. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, it was a mess.
Yet you decided to take this crazy challenge and also move to the other side of well, the country, if not the world, really. I mean,
no, it is the same country, folks. California, you know, it's the left coast. It's great. Yeah.
How did you go about it? I mean, how do you take such a monumental? So, you don't only have a new job working with new people in a new city, which is in of itself overwhelming for most people, but you're also taking on this massive project that clearly I'm sure many of competent people try to undertake, but they were never quite able to push it over the finish line. And what did you do? I mean, how did you approach it?
Yeah. I enjoy challenges. And if I'm not challenging myself and thinking about how I can grow and change, I know that in myself I'm not as happy. I believed in the concept of the building. I thought Esa-Pekka Salonen was amazing. I mean, he's a composer before he's a conductor, and I've always been interested in contemporary music, so there was a very special bond between us. In fact, I'd gotten to know him before that, because when he would come to New York to conduct the Los Angeles Philharmonic, I'd always try to convince him to come and guest conduct the New York Philharmonic, and he would never do it. But we became friends in the process. So it was that, and then I think speaking to the board of directors and the orchestra, I felt that it was a place that people were interested in change and in innovation. Is this still working? It's moving around a little bit.
I think we're going to have somebody just come quickly fix it.
Okay. Maybe if I put it up higher. How about that?
Better.
All right.
Okay, I think we
That's
can
a small room. I could probably even speak without it, but okay. Yeah. So
we were talking about the challenge of.
Yeah. So you know, I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I thought I could. It was like that Hindemith sonata. I thought I could connect one note to the other on one side and one on the other side and make it happen. And I thought there was an atmosphere of, there was a body of willing people.
I love how you brought that back to that sonata. How long did it take you? And what was at what cost? And Matt, how do you even go about raising all this money?
Oh, it was exciting. First of all, I love raising money. Mm-hmm. It's you know, I think it goes back that I was unashamed in asking my parents for money. You know, Mom, can I have this? Mm-hmm. So if it's for a good cause. I'm sorry, this is screwed up, isn't it? Here we go. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, I think
okay. I don't know why it keeps moving. All right. If it's for something I feel passionate about, I'm delighted to raise money and ask for money. And you know, one of the tricks of fundraising is you can never ask for too much. I always say, because you know, what are you going to? Oh, you know, you're going to insult the person. Oh, well, that's nice. You think I could give that? Of course, you're crazy. I can't give it. But so I felt that that I knew enough about the technical process of fundraising to be able to do it, and that it would be exciting. But actually, the more exciting proposition in a way to me, aside from being involved in building the hall, which was one of the great experiences of my life and something I won't ever get to do again, was the process of thinking here. When I went there, actually, the orchestra was in hock for $8 million. They were into the banks for $8 million, running massive structural deficits. And what it required was really a reimagination of the institution and how we would structure it and what it could be. And that was really thrilling to take part in that. And it wasn't something where I said, well, let's do this or let's do that. It was a process of working with the board and with the musicians and with the staff and with the community to really reimagine a new model. And today, the Los Angeles Philharmonic isn't only a symphony orchestra. It's really a complex musical organization. We run the Walt Disney Concert Hall and also the Hollywood Bowl. Herbie Hancock is our curator for jazz. John Adams is our creative chair. We present jazz series, world music series out at the Hollywood Bowl, Pops concert. So we basically, when an orchestra comes, chamber music, Baroque series. So we have a very large umbrella organization. And I think it's an organization that speaks to many people in Los Angeles. And one of the ideas was, Frank Gehry said to me, Deborah, the concert hall has to be a living room for Los Angeles. And I thought, well, in my living room, I play many different kinds of music, and we should try to do that. So that was reimagine the institution artistically, and then linking a business plan to it that was very important, that worked so that we could generate enough revenue to do all of that in addition to raising it.
How long did it take for you to feel, okay, yeah, this initial vision that I have is finally kicking in, it's finally paying off dividends? I think we're so used to getting things now.
I started late in 1999, and by 2003, in October when we opened the hall, I knew things were working. I knew it was that we had a plan, that we could execute against the plan, and that it would be really a remarkable time.
How intertwined do you feel is the success of the orchestra to the actual physical spaces that it performs? We don't often think about performances as part of the very environment in which they're performing. You always go to a show, and even though you certainly know that your experience is influenced by the environment in which it's performed, and you often walk away and you just talk about the music. You rarely talk about the environment. But clearly you had a vision that it's, you need both to work in order for people to feel that pleasure, feel that enjoyment.
Well, architecture is part of humanity. For me, what's so great about Walt Disney Concert Hall is it's a completely visceral, involving experience. We call it a vineyard setup. So the orchestra is moved almost into the audience, and it's got a very steep rake, so you feel like you're right in the performance, and that made an enormous difference. If we had stayed playing in the old Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, I don't know if I would have taken the job. I don't know if I would have taken the job, because I wouldn't have been as confident of my abilities to turn it around. And architecture, every day to be able to, our offices are in Walt Disney Concert Hall, to be able to walk into that hall every day and have the inspiration of that is really profound.
Do you feel that the LA Philharmonic could be successful in any environment other than Los Angeles? I mean, we were talking a bit about it over lunch, that there's all these symphony orchestras around, not just around the US, around the world are struggling, yet you are presiding over a very successful organization. How much do you feel the environment and the culture play a role, or do you think you can actually morph and shape the culture?
I think it's both. I think California is a more open, creative kind of society. Our name for it, which you can absolutely disagree with here, is it's the creative capital of the United States. And there is a lot of creative work going on there between technology and film and theater and music, and a very hot visual arts scene. So that's part of it. But part of it is, if you bring people together in a vision of where an organization can go and you build towards that, you can succeed.
I want to talk a bit about your use of technology. When I was reading about you before we had this chat, I was really impressed, because even though some of those things are like, yeah, of course, nobody else is doing it. So I'd love for the audience to hear a bit about the way that you're incorporating technology, even different audience engagement things you've developed that are, frankly, just, you may find some rock people doing it, but one of the things that I'm challenging the students with is the fact that I think that the live music experience, by and large, hasn't kept up in terms of innovation. It kept up pace with the rest of society, but you're obviously doing this, and I'm really impressed with it.
Well, let's talk about the live music aspect of it first, and how we're using technology in the live music aspect, and then the more purely technical applications. One of the great problems for major symphony orchestras is this, that we just use the same old format. Start at 8, overture, concerto, intermission, big symphony, and that's it. And maybe you do something a little different. And that's, if you go to a museum, one of the great things about going to a museum is you pick when you want to go, which we can't do for concerts. We probably have to get everybody there at the same time. You go to the show you want to go to, you walk through and look at the paintings, at the maybe you want to look at one, or maybe you want to look at 10. It's just, you're more in control of your experience. Now, we can't necessarily do that in live performance, in live musical performance. But what we can do, I think, is that it's a very different kind of, people find stimulation in different ways, and especially people have to be welcomed into going to live concerts. And so we have a whole series that's dedicated to the interaction of media and music. And some of it is new music, and some of it is old music. Some of it is using, holography in the stage, in the concerts and different things. So it's a sort of music and media program, and that's been very, very popular. And then the other thing that we've used is, using the internet and our website, is so many people don't have any education in music today, that we started a big affinity group with this wonderful guy's the classical music DJ out in Los Angeles, Brian Lauritsen. So there are a whole sort of web courses you can take that relate specifically to the concert that you're coming to. There's an affinity group, they have parties, and this has been very successful also. And it's not that you just read. I mean, there's a series of video episodes that actually train people about it. That's called Inside the Music. But so things of that nature, not doing what we call rush hour concerts, where you start a concert either at 11 and end at 10, or start at 6:47 and end. Of course, we always have rush hour in Los Angeles; it never ends. So, but things of that nature, and I think that's been you always have to keep constantly thinking about it. And for us, one of the difficult parts is how we work within our union contract to accomplish that. In terms of technology, I mean, these are such simple things now. They sound sort of silly, but it's like, for example, we were one of the first orchestra to go on iTunes, so that we made our recordings on iTunes rather than on CDs. We were the first orchestra outside of the Metropolitan Orchestra to do live HD telecasts around the world. We have an app. There was an app that was called Bravo Gustavo, where you could conduct the movement of the Mahler First Symphony, with Gustavo, and rate yourself. And just recently, our most recent project, and I don't know that any of these are going to lead to anything permanent, but it's always just trying different things and keeping that sense of life and alive. We opened our season this year with something we very rarely do, because probably 40% of the music we perform is 20th or 21st century. But we opened with a performance, a festival of the 9 Beethoven symphonies performed sequentially, all conducted by Gustavo. And we put together, you've all heard of Oculus Rift, you know what that is, those are the goggles that you wear. We filmed a special performance of the first movement of the Beethoven Fifth Symphony, and with Gustavo and the orchestra and this Oculus Rift technology. And then we got these vans, and we called them this is corny, but it worked. It was called Van Beethoven. And the Van Beethovens were outfitted like little concert halls on the inside, and they went all around the city. And you could sit there and put on the Oculus Rift sound and headphones, and you could be literally right in the midst of the orchestra and moving around and looking at different things, looking up at Gustavo's face, being in the viola section from the technology. So, is that going to sell more tickets? We don't know. But did it create a kind of awareness and excitement? Yeah, it did. So just, you never know what it is. And the other thing is you have to keep trying things. And when they work, or even if they do work, but you change. You keep trying other things. So you're moving through a constantly changing tapestry of always thinking, how can we not be static? How can we move towards invention and reinvention of what we do?
What I like about this approach is that you're not just sending a signal to the community, but I believe even within your own organization, that must be so invigorating, because I'm sure some of your organization has worked in other orchestras and probably felt sometimes stale in whatever they're doing.
Well, the organization, of course, you have your orchestra, which is the critical mass, and they've got to be inspired by the music they're making, by the people who lead them on the stage, by the soloists who are there, but also I think by a concept. And people, I think, talk down to orchestras. They don't think that they can be involved in philosophical or exciting intellectual concepts. And I thought that the Los Angeles Philharmonic membership is very open to that. But the other thing is a board of directors, and if you go into more of what I'm doing, or if you form your own groups and they're, even not-for-profits, you have a board of directors, and how you can inspire them and bring them on board so that they're thinking about the institution in a way that is, cognizant with the larger vision, that is critical. The easiest part is generally the staff, because the staff is working together on these things all the time. But for example, at the Los Angeles Philharmonic, we have this mantra that we use, and if you talk to board members, they will say it to you. We say, we seek innovation and excellence, and we say innovation first. And at most orchestras, that would be a no-no. It was excellence first. And excellence is absolutely important, but we seek innovation. And if you talk to a board member, they will say innovation and excellence. If you talk to an orchestra member, they will say innovation and excellence. And you absolutely, if a staff member. So and I think the city knows that. And when the critics write about the orchestra, they'll say that as well.
Have you found that through these initiatives, the tech initiatives, have you been able to attract a younger aged concert goer, or have you been just successful in converting older concert goers to new technology?
No, absolutely. If you come out to a concert at Walt Disney Concert Hall or at the Hollywood Bowl, especially at the Hollywood Bowl, but that's more program dependent. But if you go to the staid, the subscription concerts at Walt Disney Concert Hall, you will definitely see a younger audience. You will also, absolutely, but what you will also start to see now is not as diverse an audience by any means as I would like to see, but we are starting to see, 52% of the people in Los Angeles speak Spanish. Actually, the state of California. They speak English also, many of them, but 52% speak Spanish. And what we're starting to finally see, and it's been difficult, is, an infusion of Latino attendance. And, it took Gustavo being there, but it took more than that, because, for years we had just ignored that group of people. And as somebody said to me, well, so now you want us to come? You have to invite people in. And so in terms of marketing, we think about that. And in terms, of course, of our big educational programs, YOLA, Youth Orchestra LA.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the Youth Orchestra Initiative, and how important has that been in lowering, if you will, the average age of folks that come in to the orchestra?
Do you guys know what El Sistema is? Yeah, people know. Okay, so it's, okay.
You may need to explain to me, because I'm not sure if
Okay,
most of the
I'll
audience
give you
knows.
a really short version. It was conceived of in Venezuela by a man who should win the Nobel Peace Prize, Jose Antonio Abreu, and it's basically great.
Somebody over there is
Okay.
cheering. Venezuelan?
Yeah,
Okay.
And it's basically it's a music training. It's called a music training program, but it's really a social as well as a musical training program that takes kids, and often in really profoundly underserved areas, and brings them to what they call nucleos, or schools, every day after their regular school and on weekends, where they learn instruments, they learn a form of pedagogy, because after you've played 4 weeks, you start teaching right away, very important part of it. And it uses the orchestra and music as a metaphor for citizenship and being a good human being. Right now, 500,000 kids a year are served by this program in Venezuela. It is the shining spot of Venezuela at this time with the problems that they're facing. And when I was trying to sign Gustavo Dudamel up, I had heard of this, but I was trying to get him to sign the contract as music director. I actually traveled to Caracas. I ended up traveling there 5 or 6 times over the years, to try and learn about him as a person. But what I learned about was, because he is the apotheosis, he comes out of El Sistema. What I learned was that this was one of the single most remarkable programs I had seen for music, for citizenship, and for human beings that existed. And in my first week, and when people first go there to see it, they have the same experience. I was in tears much of the time, because these nucleos can be, one I visited was in the basement of a racetrack, and the races were going on upstairs. Another was at the top of a favela, which is one of the poorest parts of Caracas, really no electricity, no running water, but they had a nucleo. And I was just so profoundly moved. And when I left, I still couldn't get Dudamel to sign the contract to come to the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and I was going to either shoot me or him, but I couldn't get it done. And but when I got on the plane after that first visit to return to Los Angeles, I made a vow to myself. And I don't usually make vows to myself. So I made a vow, but I did. And I thought to myself, I may not be able to bring Dudamel back to Los Angeles. But in my life, I will now work to bring El Sistema to Los Angeles and as much as I can to the United States. And that was how it happened. I came back, it was very difficult. The board was not real interested in it because they said, this is like adopting a kid. You have to keep it for the rest of their life and support it because it's expensive. You have to spend money on these things. It's not income generating. The orchestra was nervous. They said, well, is this going to take money out of you? What if you spend $1 million on this? That's going to come right out of our pockets. They're big support. All of these folks are big supporters today. And we went to the community and we asked them, talked to them about how we might do it. They weren't big fans. So they said, they don't want the big bad LA Philharmonic, the big rich, white elite institution coming in and telling them what to do. And it was just an amazing experience to work through that with those different groups and bring people to a consensus and a belief. And today we have 4 nucleos that are very successful in Los Angeles. Our first class, 80% of the kids in our first class, because they started when they were 8, have gone to college, which is really unusual.
80%?
80%,
wow.
yeah, and I mean, community colleges and things, but 80%. And and I don't expect these people to become, or even want them to become necessarily musicians or play in the Los Angeles Philharmonic, although that would be great because we'd have some diversity. I want them to be great human beings and teachers and lawyers and nurses and doctors. And that's what's so exciting about it. We also started a national organization called Take a Stand, which is to help all the different nucleos throughout the country, the Sistema projects, come together. Because, for example, Boston is quite a hotbed of a lot of Sistema going on here. So that's been very, very, really thrilling for me.
You have a relationship with Longy School of Music.
Yes,
right?
we do. Longy School of Music showed a real interest, and they were very, it's Bard Longy, and they were very entrepreneurial. And we wanted to start a master's degree program in the form of pedagogy because you have to teach 6-year-olds differently, and it's not Suzuki at all. It's a very different method where you get people to teach, right away in a variety of things. And we approached a number of places, and Boston was the place where I thought we should do it because this really does have more than any place else in the country, more nucleos. And the place that wanted to take the leap with us was Bard Longy. So we made that partnership. And today, if you want to get a master's degree in Sistema pedagogy, you get it from the Bard and the LA Philharmonic. And it's an accredited program.
My last question before I open it up to the audience. So now you're at Harvard Kennedy. You took a 4-month sabbatical to come and do this. What prompted that decision? It's a pretty ballsy decision.
Well, part of
to kind of leave the fast life behind and come and kind of hit a reset button, if you will.
Yeah, well, I think I've been there almost 16 years. One of the successes, I think, of my rethinking my own management style and interests was that I restructured the organization, and our team is deeply empowered. So they're great. They're doing a great job running it. I always say it's probably going smoother than when I'm there and I'm interfering, although I try not to. So it's, and it was a good time because our budget was done for the year. Our programs were planned for this season. There's a funny little, although concerts are going on, there's this funny little, slightly quiet 4-month gap. So it seemed like a good moment for me to hit my own reset button. I'd hit it 5 or 6 years ago, but I'm always interested in changing and looking at different things. So I don't know if I'd call it ballsy. I'd call it good management.
Though not too many people have the courage to sort of do that.
Well, if you met our team, I don't think it was a difficult decision.
And
when I get back there, they have to get used to me again when I come back because they're doing a great job. We are a little bit in touch. They're doing a great job. And it's my leaving and coming back is going to change the dynamic in many different ways because they're going to grow and change when I'm gone. Hopefully I'm going to grow, although I might not change. And then I'll come back and they'll be there, and we're going to have a moment of emotional and technical reset, and we don't know what that is. That's exciting though.
And what, for the audience, what do you do at the Kennedy School right now?
Well, first of all, I have so much more free time than I have in my regular life. It's amazing. So I get to go to, I do teach, I'll tell you what I do in a minute, but I get to go to lectures by the most incredible world leaders, and it's just fantastic. And they're all at the Kennedy School. And 1 minute can be the Tony Blair can be there one day, and then the next day, John Kerry, literally. And because I'm on the faculty, I can get front row seats. It's fabulous. But the reason I think they brought me to the Kennedy School was that in a very prescient way, and one that I really spoke a lot about, is that they are trying to prepare, as you're preparing to be leaders in music, they're preparing people for leadership roles in public policy and public service. And one of the very sad things or concerning things is that increasingly people are so siloed in what they do that they don't expose themselves in a greater way to what the world is about. And I think the implications of the arts and the importance of the arts for us as human beings, for us as thinkers, just for us as ourselves and enjoyment of a full and rich life, I think that is easy to overlook in a really high-stress, high-tech place like the Kennedy School, which is so great and turning out so many amazing leaders. So the idea was to introduce this sense of, oh yeah, there are arts, there are other things in life. And so I do speak about leadership, and I do lectures on that and the evolution of various leadership styles, and you heard part of it. That was sort of the Reader's Digest version, but the thinking I had to give all the answers in the heroic model to the more team model today. But I'm also running something called the creative class, and what I'm doing is bringing in highly creative people, not in politics and not in government, who we interview and we talk about the meaning of being a creative person, the meaning of arts in society, how it can relate to you as you go to Harvard Business School. So we've had this year, it's happening right now. So Julie Taymor, who's a fantastic director, was speaking. Frank Gehry is coming, of course, the architect. John Adams, the composer. And then somebody who might surprise you, Michael Eisner, who ran the Disney studios for years, not the studios, the Disney Corporation. And he was the last of the creative moguls, of the studio heads. It's not like that anymore. That's also evolved into a different model. And then there'll be some other surprise guests as we go along.
Wow, that's a cool list of speakers, very, very diverse. A lot of them heroes of mine, by the way. So that's very cool. Okay, folks, I want to open it up for questions for Deborah. Yeah, and it would be great if we hear your name, your major, and also where you're from.
My name is Pablo Galama. I'm from Ecuador, and my major is music business. You talked about concept a lot. Especially you said that one of your duties is to form vision. What do you have to say about that? I'm very concerned about the industry in Ecuador. It's very tiny, it's very slow pacing. Nobody actually tries to do nothing there. They are all very, they don't know where to go. And I'm trying to find, I've seen this movement is so fast and it's developing so well in different areas of creativity. I want to be able to succeed in that, but I don't know how to extend my vision to others. So what would you say about that?
You see, I don't know that it's about your vision or my vision. It's maybe more about passion and about uniting people around a passion. And because one person, the only thing one person can do is to get other people around them in a kind of team or a kind of group that cares. And that is, I think that is the essential way that we affect change. And so generally, change is, how does change happen? It's, usually it's evolutionary. There's not radical change. Radical change or adaptive change, as Ron Heifetz would say, happens when you've got a real crisis, and then people coalesce around that crisis. So that's one way to affect change. The other way is to affect affinity groups or institutions that you can infect and really inoculate with that passion and with the vision. But I don't know what your vision is. But for me, what turned out to be the vision of the Los Angeles Philharmonic was formed by interaction and thought of many people. And yes, it takes one leader to help coalesce that. And then I have to say that, when I met Gustavo Dudamel, that, you know, he has been one of my greatest teachers in many ways. He's much younger than I am, but he was the person who got me to really focus on finding what I call, you know, that intersection between the artistic imperative and the social imperative. So it's not a, it's such a big question you've asked. That's sort of, that's the best sort of thought I can give off the top of my head.
Yeah.
My name is Miguel Deborah, and I've studied in the music business program. I'm a graduate now.
Where are you from?
I'm from Boston.
Oh.
Okay.
My question is, I'm involved with a number of arts organizations here in the city, and there seems to be a real kind of panic right now in that some of the organizations that focus on classical music, for instance, in my case, NBC, they're really struggling to figure out ways to reach the young professional community here in the city to start grooming a new era of patrons. And I'd be curious to hear what the LA Phil has done, kind of build a bridge between the organization and millennials who are maybe not aware yet of the magic of classical music.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is there's no one thing. This is a major issue because we are really at a moment right now where sort of the tectonic plates in society are shifting. And so, for example, one way to talk about this is in the just 20 years ago when people would go to, say, the Boston Symphony or the New York Philharmonic or the Los Angeles Philharmonic, you know, my parents actually would buy a subscription series, and they would buy, you know, 12 Tuesday nights. They would go. People don't do that now. It's really morphed into more of an what I would call an on-demand society. I mean, you know, when I look at our millennial staff, they don't have landlines, they don't watch television, they stream, they don't own cars, they use Zipcar. It's just a very different way of consuming culture. So what these large sort of embedded organizations have to do is think about really a multitude of ways to reach out in this, I mean, what is the most profound change in my lifetime? It is the internet, and I mean in all of our lives. It has completely changed our lives. So thinking about how we interact, we use that as a form of interaction. It's forming affinity groups. It's people, I think younger millennials look for intellectual or value added so that you don't just put on a program, you put it on in the context of a festival that has ideas and you know, behind it. And I think it's a whole number of those kinds of things. There's no, I wish I could say there's one easy answer. But it is a challenge, and people should be nervous about it because the model that sustained these big elite organizations is eroding, and it will not be as we know it 15 and 20 years from now. It's a big change. I mean, as successful as we are, and we have balanced our budget since 2003 and done very well and have strong, robust attendance, but for example, our subscription model has, since the recession in 2001, has dipped by 1.5% every year since 2008. Now you add that up in 2015, that's significant because it means we have to sell single tickets, and a single ticket costs 30% more than a subscription ticket to sell. But in addition to that, we can't curate a whole season, you know, because if we're selling everything on individual sales, we have to think, okay, now we've got to think differently. How are we going to have the hook to bring people in? So it's a fascinating issue, and you know, people are spending, you know, a lot of money and a lot of time thinking about how it will morph. And I think there will be an answer. I'm actually very optimistic, but it's not the old answers. So that's bad because I didn't give you an answer, did I? But tried to give you an outline of it.
Will.
Thanks for coming, Deborah.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Conversation.
Name, major, and yeah.
My name is Will. I'm a music business student, former cellist from Vermont, actually.
Yay.
I have kind of a boomerang question on Miguel's point. How much, what do you think, or how dependent do you think the future of classical music industry is on technology? And where is the line between innovation with, for example, Oculus, and keeping true to the core values of classical? Because I think that's a very interesting question.
I think that's a great question. And I think there are two different sides, two different aspects, two different pillars of that. And I'll tell you the overrated pillar, although we've got to keep working at it. And that is how we can introduce technology, into the concerts and into how people experience music. Because I think, in a way, because everybody is in a Silicon Valley head in this country now, and that's the way we think, and that's cool, and that's trendy, that technology is the answer. And I'm not sure in that aspect it is. I mean, Oculus Rift, people enjoyed it. It was fun. We got press about it. I don't think that's necessarily going to convert people. But I think we have to try it. We have a lot of different things we have to try. Where I do think technology is going to pay off in the long run, though, is how we market. And we don't quite know. I mean, we're getting better and better at it, but technology will be how we market. I mean, new methods of marketing. And that will be where I think the breakthroughs will occur that will be meaningful more than in the, as much as I think it was great we did Oculus Rift and it was fun, or great that we had Bravo Gustavo, that's not going to change the world. How we market technologically the music will.
Johannes.
My name is Johannes. I studied contemporary music writing and production. I'm now graduate and have my own company. My question is for you as an entrepreneur and as a CEO and president. Like, you have so many things you have to do and there's so many achievements. How do you get this discipline and the focus and to focus on right things and get things done of a lot of possibilities, of a lot of projects?
Well, one of the things as a CEO that I really value, that I subscribe to, is I only do what I can do better than other people, or that only I can do. And the rest, I will get other people to do. And that is a critical, I think, aspect of being a CEO, because one can be sucked into the vortex of answering 100 emails a day and, micromanaging, and that's not how you get to the bigger vision of accomplishment. And when you look at really successful executives, they're rarely micromanagers. And in fact, people might say it's somewhat chaotic in how they manage. I think, unfortunately, I would like us to be more chaotic. I think I'm a little more buttoned down than that. But it's a sense of prioritizing and resource allocation. And some people are better at it than others. And I think those are the people who can help to form that vision that leads their organizations forward.
We have time for one more question. Yeah.
I'm Michelle.
These are great questions. Thank you.
I'm actually a guest. I'm an alum and current staff of the Boston Conservatory next door.
Where are you from?
Boston at this point. My question is kind of a long one. I'm wondering if you could just speak about any of your projects that have gone through, or proposals that you have been excited for that haven't gone through or haven't lived up to your expectations, and how you managed to dealing with maybe board members who weren't supportive, or something that just fell flat for you, and how that turned into a positive experience. And also related to that, kind of the institutional misogyny, the hierarchy of classical music, especially when you were starting orchestra management, because I think that's definitely a thing that's still around when women are trying to.
Okay, can you guys hear the question? Okay, let's start with the misogyny question first, because you might have to remind me of the first one, because I didn't drink enough coffee. If you look at the Fortune 500 companies in America today, I think 2.5% are led by the CEOs are women. So I rest my case right there. I just read an article about the 100 in the Harvard Business Review, the 100 greatest managers in the United States today. Of the 100, 2 were women. So we're right in that category. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at in the symphony orchestra world, the big 10 orchestras today, 1, 2, like 4 of them are the CEOs are women, I think. But it wasn't that way for a very long time. I think misogyny has been wiped out in terms of the audition process for orchestras, because we have the screen, which now, in a funny way, it helped. The point of screened auditions was to have racial diversity and cultural diversity, but in fact what it led to was a surprise, which was gender diversity, which is great. And now it's almost an impediment to the other kind of diversity. So that's an interesting sort of double thing that's happened. So yeah, there was misogyny, and the reason probably, that was one of the, I think, and misogyny, the way it tends to, Julie Taymor talked about this in our interview the other day, that, if a woman manager does something, it's seen as aggressive and bitchy, and if a guy does it, he's a visionary. And Professor Iris Bonet at Harvard, she's putting out a book that's called What Works, and she did blind studies where she took a real woman executive in the Silicon Valley who was incredibly successful, and she ran a case with a placebo, if you will, guy who did exactly what the woman had done, the real woman, and then there was this fake guy who did the exact same things, and then asked people to rate them. And he got incredibly high and terrific ratings, and she was a bitch. And she was not nice, and she was this and that. And so it's something that, we're culturally working to overcome. So, I can't say it's interfered with my career, because I've done okay, and I've been able to accomplish things. Did I take some more lumps along the way? Yeah. But, today, there's a different atmosphere. So the times are changing, and it's even changing for women who are conductors. And it will be nice, in the future when I don't have to say woman conductor, because you would never say about Helen Mirren, she's an actress. You say she's an actor, and that's where we have to get to. Now, in terms of projects failing, if you don't challenge risk, if you don't take risk on, you will eventually fail or accomplish very little. So, Frank Gehry once in an interview about me said, Deborah Borda loves to jump off cliffs. And I do like to jump off cliffs, but only if I have a parachute or there's a nice something soft that's going to catch me at the bottom. Yeah, we have failures all the time. For example, our live HD broadcasts, which we did very proudly for 2 years, they weren't attracting the audience that we needed to attract, and they were very expensive. So as much as I just loved doing them and it was great, we had to stop them. The first conception of how we would run Yola, was a much more top-down conception than what we have today. And, we had to learn about that and change how we're doing it. But, there are things that go wrong all the time. But if they weren't, we wouldn't be living our lives and moving our institutions forward in the way that we really need to. So, I think if you don't fail, I think risk and failure are a critical component of accomplishment. Not success, because who knows what success is, but accomplishment of knowing that in the end you made some difference. You accomplished something, you had a goal that you wanted to meet, and you got there.
Any last questions?
I think we exhausted everybody.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Great questions.
Thank you
Great
so much,
questions.
Deborah. It's an honor to have you here.
Great to be here.